A terrifying sound pierces the silence. Metal being torn apart, water rushing in, the Costa Concordia tilting dangerously. This floating palace, which promised luxury and fun, now seemed like a scene from a horror movie. More than 4,000 lives, at risk, passengers panicking as the ship slowly sank. And the captain? Oh, he had other priorities that night. What happened to turn a symbol of glory into a tragedy the world will never forget? The Costa Concordia wasn't just a cruise ship. It was a maritime colossus, a floating masterpiece that seemed to challenge the ocean itself. With its 290-meter length and space for over 4,000 people, it was practically a city navigating the Mediterranean waters. Inside, every detail exuded luxury. There were sparkling pools, dazzling casinos, and restaurants where you could taste dishes straight out of a culinary competition. But it didn't stop there. The Costa Concordia even housed exclusive works of art, decorating its halls and corridors like a floating museum. Built by the Italian shipyard Fincantieri in Genoa, the Costa Concordia was a national pride for Italy. Commissioned by Costa Crociere, one of the world's largest cruise operators, it was launched in 2006 as a technological and cultural gem. At the center of one of the ship's most famous halls stood a bronze sculpture called the Conquerors, symbolizing humanity's triumph over the seas. It's ironic because by the end of that fateful day, the sea showed who really rules. For many, the night of January 13, 2012, was more than just a simple cruise trip. It was a dream come true. Entire families had planned this journey for months, maybe years, saving at every opportunity to finally experience the luxury that only a ship like the Costa Concordia could offer. Mariana and Ricardo, for example, were celebrating 25 years of marriage. Sitting in the main restaurant, they toasted with a glass of wine. "We deserve this, don't we?" Ricardo said, admiring the brilliantly lit hall. Mariana smiled. They were happy, and who wouldn't be? Elsewhere, on the ship, Anna and João, newlyweds, were taking selfies on the main deck. The fresh Mediterranean breeze blew as they gazed at the lights of Giglio Island in the distance. "Can you believe we're here?" Anna asked, hugging João. It was the kind of trip that seemed too perfect to be true. There were also children running through the corridors, laughing and playing while their parents relaxed in pool chairs, admiring the endless horizon. For everyone there, the Costa Concordia wasn't just a ship. It was a promise of happiness, a break from routine and life's everyday problems. But what no one could have imagined was that, in a matter of minutes, this dream voyage would turn into a nightmare. Because at 9:45 p.m., the sound of tearing metal echoed through the ship, and tranquility gave way to chaos. How did such a grand ship, designed to enchant the entire world, end up as one of the largest modern maritime tragedies? The night was calm, the sea reflected the moonlight, and everything seemed in perfect harmony. The Costa Concordia, majestic and imposing, sailed close to Giglio Island, illuminating the waters around it with its brilliant lights. On the bridge, Captain Francesco Schettino was accompanied by Domnica Kimortan, a young Moldovan ex-dancer and the captain's special guest. Schettino, seemingly eager to impress his guest, decided to alter the official route. "I want to show the island in a way no one has ever seen before," he reportedly said, pointing at the map. Domnica, with an enchanting smile, commented, "It's beautiful, Francesco. It looks like paradise." But as Schettino kept his eyes fixed on the island, the navigation officer beside him warned, "Captain, we're getting too close." Schettino waved his hand dismissively. He had performed similar salutes before, risky maneuvers to get closer to islands and impress local residents. Then, the unthinkable happened. At 9:45 p.m., the Costa Concordia violently collided with a submerged rock formation. The sound of tearing metal echoed through the ship, followed by a tremor that caused plates to fall, glasses to break, and passengers to stumble. On the bridge, Schettino jumped to his feet, his face frozen in shock. "What was that?" Domnica screamed. The navigation officer pointed to the radar where the impact was recorded. "Rocks, Captain, rocks!" Water began flooding the ship's lower compartments, and within minutes the Costa Concordia started to tilt slightly. "Close the watertight doors," Schettino ordered, but it was already too late. The damage was catastrophic. A 70-meter gash in the hull, enough to quickly flood the lower decks. With the ship gravely damaged and starting to list, Time was of the essence. But the captain hesitated, and that hesitation would prove fatal. As chaos began to take over the ship's corridors and lounges, a tense silence reigned on the bridge. Schettino analyzed the monitors, trying to grasp the extent of the damage. An engineer rushed in, out of breath. "Captain, the lower compartments are completely flooded. The ship is compromised." Schettino seemed paralyzed. Dominica, still on the bridge, whispered, "Francesco, what are we going to do?" But he didn't respond. Instead, he picked up the phone and attempted to contact Costa Concordia to report the incident. For 30 long minutes, no evacuation order was given. Meanwhile, passengers in the corridors began to realize something was wrong. A couple in the dining room commented, "The lights flickered, and I felt the floor shake." A crew member tried to reassure them. "Everything's fine, just a technical issue." But the ship's tilt became increasingly evident, and water was already reaching the lower cabins. Finally, at 10:15 p.m., Schettino gave the order to evacuate. But by then, the situation was already desperate. Many lifeboats were unusable due to the ship's tilt, and confusion spread quickly. The evacuation had begun, but without clear leadership, chaos consumed the Costa Concordia. When the evacuation was announced, loudspeakers echoed through the ship. "Please remain calm and proceed to the upper decks." But calm was the last thing passengers could manage. People ran through the corridors searching for life jackets and trying to find lost family members. On the decks, the ship's tilt made it almost impossible to safely launch lifeboats. Some passengers screamed, "They're stuck! We can't release them!" Meanwhile, crew members tried to organize lines, but the panic was overwhelming. A mother held her young child in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Please, someone help me get him on a lifeboat." A crew member tried to reassure her. "Ma'am, we're doing everything we can." On the bridge, Schettino was no longer in control. He had left his position, entrusting responsibility to other officers while heading to the lower decks. The lack of leadership only added to the confusion. As some lifeboats were finally launched, other passengers desperately tried to balance themselves on an increasingly tilted ship. It was a scene of pure chaos, like something out of a nightmare. And the captain? Well, the decision he made next would forever place him on the list of the most controversial leaders in maritime history. In maritime culture, there is an unshakable principle, a code of honor that is both ethical and practical. The captain must be the last to abandon ship. This rule is more than just a tradition. It reflects total responsibility. In international maritime law, the captain is considered the supreme authority on board and, as such, is legally and morally responsible for the safety of all passengers and crew. This principle is deeply rooted in the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, a global treaty that establishes safety standards at sea. But on that fateful night of January 13, 2012, Francesco Schettino broke this code in a scandalous manner. As the Costa Concordia tilted further, slowly sinking into the dark waters of the Mediterranean, Schettino decided to abandon the ship. He, who should have been the leader, the symbol of safety for more than 4,000 souls aboard, was seen boarding a lifeboat before everyone was evacuated. Witnesses reported that while passengers were still struggling to find a way out, Schettino appeared apathetic. "Captain, are you leaving the ship?" an officer asked in disbelief. But Schettino avoided eye contact, murmuring something about coordinating from outside. Those who managed to board the lifeboat with him could hardly believe what they saw. He seemed confused, lost, as if he didn't know what to do. A surviving passenger later commented, "On Giglio Island, locals observed the disaster from a distance, and rumors about the captain's abandonment began to spread. The captain is always the last one. Everyone knows that," shouted an indignant local as he helped rescue passengers. And if you think this was already infuriating, the next chapter of this tragedy reveals just how far negligence and disregard can go. Shortly after abandoning ship, Schettino was contacted by the Italian Coast Guard. On the other end of the line was Commander Gregorio De Falco, a man known for his strictness and commitment to maritime safety. The recording of the call, which quickly spread worldwide, is a mix of fury and disbelief. DeFalco began directly. "Captain Schettino, are you on board?" When Schettino tried to justify his absence, DeFalco's patience ran out. "Get back on board, Schettino. That's an order." Schettino's silence was deafening. After a few seconds, he offered a flimsy excuse. I'm coordinating the rescue operations." DeFalco's response was sharp. "From where? From the lifeboat? Get back on the ship and tell us what needs to be done." But Schettino never returned. His justification that he accidentally fell into a lifeboat, something he insisted on in later interviews, only worsened public outrage. DeFalco's famous words, "Vada, a bordo, cazzo, get back on board, damn it," became a rallying cry, symbolizing the national shame Italy felt over Schettino's behavior. Meanwhile, on the ship, desperate passengers were still fighting to save themselves. The captain had abandoned his position, but unlikely heroes emerged in his place. In the midst of the chaos, who were the true leaders on board? The darkness of the night seemed even denser over the sea surrounding the Costa Concordia. The ship, dramatically tilted, looked like a wounded beast struggling against its fate. Meanwhile, on the decks, chaos was absolute. Passengers screamed for help. Some prayed, others cried while clinging to their loved ones. Amid the confusion, the first heroes emerged. Crew members and passengers brimming with courage began to improvise. A flight attendant was seen helping elderly passengers put on life jackets while shouting, "Stay calm, follow the line, we'll make it." Another crew member, despite lacking proper training, guided terrified parents and children to the few lifeboats, still operational. "I can't swim," a man shouted, frozen in panic. "Just jump, we'll pull you in," responded a passenger already in the water, extending his hand. Meanwhile, outside the ship, fishermen and residents of Giglio Island began to mobilize. Using small, simple boats, they navigated toward the Costa Concordia, lighting the waters with flashlights. "We can't just stand here," said a fisherman named Giuseppe. "Those people need us." But time was against everyone. The ship's tilt increased with every passing minute, making it harder to access lifeboats. Many passengers began jumping directly into the icy sea, hoping to be rescued by the smaller boats. The water was freezing. It felt like it was cutting through my skin, a survivor later recalled. As locals and crew gave their all to save lives, one question loomed large. Where was the captain during this crucial moment? Amid the chaos, it wasn't just the crew members who stood out. Ordinary passengers who had never faced anything like this also became unexpected heroes. A young doctor traveling with his wife improvised a first aid station on the upper deck. Using towels and bed sheets, he treated injuries while calming the most distressed passengers. "Are you a doctor?" a wounded woman asked. "Tonight, I'm whatever I need to be," he replied while bandaging a deep cut on her arm. Elsewhere on the ship, a group of university students formed a human chain to help children cross a tilted area. "I just kept thinking that if we didn't do something, no one would," said one of the students in a later interview. These stories of heroism provided glimmers of hope amid the tragedy. But there were also moments that broke hearts. An elderly couple married for over 50 years refused to leave the ship without each other. "If we're going, let's go together," the husband said, holding his wife's hand as they waited for rescue. These acts of bravery stood in stark contrast to the captain's abandonment and raised a critical question. How far can human courage go in the face of chaos? Dawn brought a somber silence to Giglio Island. The Costa Concordia, now almost completely submerged, rested on its side, with its hull piercing the surface of the sea. Despite the heroic rescue efforts, 32 lives were lost in this tragedy. Among the victims were entire families, honeymooning couples, and friends who had planned the trip of their dreams. One particularly heartbreaking story was that of an Italian family, a father, mother, and their young child, who were trapped in a flooded corridor. According to reports, the parents used their bodies as shields to protect their child from the water, but tragically, None of them survived. Another case that touched the hearts of many was that of a Filipino musician who was part of the ship's entertainment band. He continued playing his instrument until the very last moments, trying to calm panicked passengers, but he, too, could not save himself. Survivors recall his bravery with tears in their eyes. Giglio Island became the center of collective grief. "We never imagined something like this could happen here," said a local resident as she handed out blankets and food to rescued passengers. But the impact of the tragedy didn't end with the rescue. For many survivors, the nightmare continued for years. For those who escaped with their lives, the memories of that night became deep scars, both physical and emotional. Many developed a fear of traveling, open seas, or even being in enclosed, or spaces. A young Frenchman who had been on his honeymoon with his wife recounted, "Even today, I wake up in the middle of the night hearing screams and smelling the mix of seawater and fuel. I've never boarded a ship again." A crew member who had helped save dozens of passengers revealed that he had to give up his career. "I can't look at the sea without feeling an overwhelming weight. All I see are the faces of the people I couldn't save." Psychologists and therapists who worked with the survivors confirmed that many experienced recurring nightmares, panic attacks, and even feelings of guilt. One therapist explained, "It's as if the weight of the ship wasn't just physical, but emotional. Survivors feel they should have done more, even when they did everything they could." The Costa Concordia's impact was felt by those who survived, those who lost loved ones, and even those who watched helplessly. It also raised pressing questions about how such a massive disaster could have been avoided. After the initial shock of the tragedy, the painstaking work of analyzing what went wrong began. The investigation, conducted by maritime safety experts, revealed a chain of human errors and systemic failures that, when combined, led to the disaster. The first piece of this puzzle was the ship's route. Schettino, in a completely unauthorized decision, ordered the Costa Concordia to sail dangerously close to Giglio Island. The reason? To impress the locals and, according to some reports, to impress the ex-dancer and alleged lover he had brought to the bridge that night. This salute, as it was called, was an informal and risky maneuver that, while not unprecedented, should never have been attempted with a ship of that size. But it wasn't just the route. The emergency systems, which should have ensured a safe evacuation, proved confusing and poorly prepared. In many cases, the crew lacked adequate training to handle extreme situations. A survivor recalled, "The crew seemed as lost as we were. Some didn't even know how to operate the lifeboats." This lack of preparedness turned a critical situation into complete chaos. Additionally, communication failures exacerbated the disaster. The delay in ordering the evacuation about 30 minutes after the impact cost precious lives. For many experts, this delay was fatal. A technical report concluded, if evacuation had been immediate, most lives could have been saved. But Schettino's decisions that night held an even greater mystery. What drove an experienced captain to ignore so many protocols? As the investigation progressed, more disturbing details about Schettino's conduct emerged. During interrogations, he admitted to altering the ship's route on a whim. Experts were stunned by the trivial reason that endangered thousands of lives. "This isn't just irresponsibility, it's a complete disregard for duty," an investigator commented. However, the tragedy was not solely the result of inflated ego. The lack of external controls that could have prevented such a decision also came under scrutiny. Cruise companies were accused of prioritizing profitability and passenger experience over safety, and so the inevitable question arose. The Costa Concordia was a symbol of modernity and comfort, but to what extent was its safety sacrificed to maintain that image? As investigations uncovered the truth behind the tragedy, another question lingered. Would the maritime industry learn from this disaster? The Costa Concordia disaster was a brutal wake-up call for the maritime industry, exposing vulnerabilities in systems meant to ensure the safety of millions of passengers annually. Following the sinking, international organizations like the International Maritime Organization, IMO, were compelled to review protocols and implement significant changes. One of the first measures was the requirement for more rigorous training for cruise ship crews. "It's not enough to know how to smile and serve passengers," commented an IMO specialist. "They need to be prepared for emergencies where every second counts." In addition, safety inspections were intensified. Now, all cruise ships are required to conduct evacuation drills before leaving the initial port. This was a direct response to the fact that, on the Costa Concordia, many passengers didn't even know where the lifeboats were. Another critical change was the creation of more restrictive routes. "Goodbye. Risky salutes," said several captains. This informal practice, like the one that led the Concordia dangerously close to Giglio Island, was banned in many parts of the world. These changes brought greater safety but also sparked debates. Were they implemented just to appease public opinion, or do they truly represent a genuine commitment to safety? While the maritime industry felt the impact, another sector faced even more profound consequences: the insurance industry. The Costa Concordia sinking triggered one of the largest maritime insurance payouts in history. The total cost, including the ship's salvage, compensation for victims' families, and reimbursements to passengers, exceeded $2 billion. Insurance companies, including Lloyd's of London, found themselves at the center of this financial storm. "It was a massive blow," an analyst commented, "not just in monetary terms, but because it revealed how exposed these companies were to disasters of this magnitude." From then on, maritime insurance underwent a revolution. Policies began to include more specific clauses, covering everything from evacuations to the removal of wreckage. While this increased costs for cruise companies, it provided greater protection in emergency situations. On the other hand, many victims' families faced bureaucratic challenges to receive compensation. Some argued that the amounts offered were not proportional to the trauma and loss they suffered. "How do you put a price on my child's life?" asked the mother of one of the victims during a press conference. As industries tried to recover financially, the tragedy left even deeper marks on public consciousness and the waters of the Mediterranean. After the Costa Concordia's rescue and removal, attention inevitably turned to accountability. Who should pay the price for a tragedy that claimed 32 lives and caused incalculable damage? As survivors and experts examined the mistakes made, on that fateful night, one name stood out above all others: Francesco Schettino. The captain, who had become the focal point of the disaster, was now in the defendant's chair. To many, he wasn't just a man who made mistakes. He was the primary culprit behind a series of decisions that turned the Costa Concordia from a floating palace into a maritime graveyard. The trial, which began in 2013, drew worldwide attention. Schettino faced serious charges, including manslaughter, abandoning ship, and causing the shipwreck. During the proceedings, survivors, experts, and crew members were called to testify, piecing together the events of that night. In February 2015, after more than 2 years of hearings, the verdict was finally delivered: 16 years in prison. The sentence was divided into 3 parts: 10 years for multiple counts of manslaughter, 5 years for causing the shipwreck, 1 year for abandoning the ship. But for many, justice still felt incomplete. "It should have been life imprisonment," said a relative of one of the victims. Others criticized the sentence as a way to deflect attention from larger systemic failures in the maritime industry. Nevertheless, the trial provided more than just answers. It also exposed the behind-the-scenes negligence and ego that marked this tragedy. Schettino, in his defense, claimed that he was being made a scapegoat. He argued that other factors contributed to the disaster, including an unprepared crew and failures in the ship's systems. He also insisted that the salute to Giglio Island was a common industry practice and that he wasn't alone in deciding to alter the route. But the most controversial part of his defense was his explanation for abandoning the ship. Schettino claimed he had fallen into a lifeboat while coordinating the evacuation. This justification was widely ridiculed, especially after the infamous recording of his conversation with Coast Guard Commander Gregorio De Falco was released. "Get back on the ship, damn it," De Falco ordered as Schettino hesitated. This recording became a symbol of public outrage, highlighting the stark contrast between a captain's expected duty and Schettino's actions that night. So, how do we prevent future tragedies like this one? First, it's essential to establish clear international standards for extreme situations. Currently, the lack of regulation creates an environment where companies can operate without adequate oversight, putting lives at risk. The voices of scientists and engineers must be heard more loudly, and warnings cannot be dismissed in the name of profit or fame. After the Titanic disaster, strict regulations were implemented to improve maritime safety. Will the Costa Concordia case have the same impact on the cruise industry? The Costa Concordia was a giant of the seas, a symbol of luxury and innovation. But in the end, it showed us that even the greatest can be undone by small, poorly calculated decisions. It wasn't the ocean that destroyed the Costa Concordia. It was human choices. And the question remains, have we learned from this tragedy? Or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes in different waters with similar stories? The only certainty is that the sea, as always, will continue watching us, indifferent, ready to remind us who's truly in charge. Now, tell me in the comments, do you agree with the 16-year sentence for the captain? Or do you think it was too lenient? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. And look, the video appearing on the screen now brings another fascinating maritime story you need to hear. Click and check it out. A big hug, and see you in the next maritime tale.